So first we're going to talk about what we're doing today. This is the first time we've tried this before. We will be reading Decoding Genes with Max Axiom, and at the same time you should go through and pick out the new vocabulary that you see in the chapter. The whole point of this is to deepen our understanding of this new vocabulary by picking up patterns. So we should be able to, at the end of this, say the new vocabulary and how it's related to each other, what patterns we see. So here we go. Section 1. Genes and Heredity. Super scientist Max Axiom explores heredity at his family reunion. Ever notice how family members look alike? I got my height from my dad and my eyes from my mom. The process called heredity means parents pass on their traits to their kids. Traits you can see, count, or measure make up the phenotype of a plant or animal. These features are things like coat color and wing shape. How's the airplane coming? Great, Uncle Max. Kids use directions to build a model plane. Likewise, the body uses a special set of directions called genes to build traits in the phenotype. These dogs have different phenotypes because their genes are different. The genes that produce the phenotype are called the genotype. Tilly passed some of her genes on to her puppies because of heredity. The study of heredity is called genetics. Back in 1860, Gregor Mendel became the father of genetics. Mendel crossed pea plants with different traits. Then he examined the offspring. The experiments were simple, but required careful counting and recording. When I plant seeds from the yellow pods, the new plants also have yellow pods, and the seeds from the green pods always make more green pods. Each plant must have something inside that makes the color right. In my time, we called that special something a gene. When I crossed yellow pod and green pod plants, all the offspring were green. The green must be the stronger than the yellow gene. Exactly. Green is dominant and yellow is recessive. When I crossed those offspring green pods with each other, something amazing happened. A yellow gene was hiding in those plants. A plant has 2 copies of each gene. These copies are called alleles, but it can only give 1 allele to each offspring. A few get the yellow allele from both parents. Since yellow is recessive, the plants need 2 copies of the yellow allele to have yellow pods. Mendel bred peas for 7 years and counted 300,000 peas. His findings are the basis of the science we call genetics. Let's explore some human traits. The allele for dimples is dominant to the allele for no dimples. Can you guess which person has the allele for dimples? Some traits are determined by a single gene. Other traits like height and hair type are determined by more than 1 gene. That's why we see lots of phenotypes even within a family. Mendel figured out laws of heredity, but he could only guess at the true nature of genes. Believe it or not, we're sisters. Section 2. The structure of genes. Every cell in your body is like this factory. Cells make proteins, substances the body needs to keep working. Genes tell the cell how to build each protein. Let's take a closer look. This is a cell. Ribosomes build proteins inside the cell. The directions come from the nucleus, which is the command center of the cell. The nucleus contains genetic material, or DNA. That's short for deoxyribonucleic acid. This might look like one giant spaghetti noodle, but DNA is divided into chromosomes. Line up the human genome and you'll see 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 46 in total. For each pair, 1 chromosome came from mom and the other from dad. A numbers game. Each species has a specific number of chromosomes. Mosquitoes have 6, dogs have 78, king crabs have 208. Let's get in closer. Each chromosome is made of genes lined up in a row. This gene gives directions to make keratin, the protein in your fingernails. Genes are made of DNA, two long chains of sugars and phosphates, spiraled around each other. They're held together by small molecules called bases. There are 4 kinds of bases: adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Bases pair up in a certain way. Adenine pairs with thymine, guanine pairs with cytosine. The structure of DNA. In 1953, Francis Crick and James Watson discovered the structure of DNA. By doing this, they won a great scientific race to unravel the puzzle of heredity. Both later acknowledged that they couldn't have done it without Rosalind Franklin's help. She took a special picture of DNA using X-ray crystallography. Imagine walking down a chromosome and writing down every single base. That's exactly what the scientists of the Human Genome Project did in 1990. Completed in 2003, it took 13 years for them to read 3 billion bases. Our genes make the proteins our bodies need. Proteins are long strings of molecules called amino acids. Each gene provides a list of the amino acids needed to make a protein, but the list is in code. The code for each amino acid is 3 bases long. Inside the cell, the ribosome reads the code and builds the protein by connecting amino acids in the right order. To recap, DNA is made of 4 chemical bases arranged in a double spiral. Sections of DNA called genes are code for proteins. Individual strands of DNA called chromosomes carry thousands of genes. All the strands of DNA together make up the genome, the body's entire genetic makeup. The human genome contains more than 20,000 genes. They decide the makeup of skin, bone, brain, and muscle. The average gene is 10,000 to 15,000 bases long. Section 3. Genomes, Variation, Evolution. Scientists determine the exact order of the bases of the genomes of many different organisms. This process is called sequencing. By studying the genomes of many different organisms, scientists discovered an amazing fact. From fruit flies to humans, many of our genes are almost exactly the same. Powerful computers can compare genomes of different species. 96% of human DNA is identical to chimpanzees. That means humans and chimps are closely related. The differences between our 2 species are caused by small differences in DNA. It's pretty clear these bears are related. Their DNA is almost the same. But where do the differences come from? To answer that, we need to understand genetic mutation. Mutations happen when one base turns into another. This changes the genetic code. For example, solar rays and X-rays zap cells with radiation. A direct hit can mutate DNA. Some mutations cause problems, many others don't. Mutation is only part of the story. Adaptation is the other part. Polar bears are well adapted to their environment. White fur hides them in the snow. Hollow hairs provide extra warmth. Around 250,000 years ago, ancient bears roamed Europe and North America. The DNA of one of those bears mutated. This new version of a gene made it a little easier for the polar bear to survive in the cold. Remember Mendel's study of heredity? Well, that bear passed the mutated gene to her cubs. More changes occurred and were passed on too. Over time, the bears became more adapted to the cold. Eventually, they looked like the polar bears we know today. The diversity of life we see around the world is a result of mutations in DNA. Even within species, individuals can look really different. Only some of these puppies look like their mom. Each puppy has a different set of genes. Grandma Rose finally finished working on our family history. Mendel said half of our genes come from each parent. Let's see how that works. Imagine the genes are like a deck of cards. Your mom got one set from each of her parents. Your dad also got one set from each of his parents. When they had you and your sister, they shuffled the genes. You each got your own set. Gene shuffling is an important part of reproduction, and it explains why we're all different. Section 4. Genes in Action. This is a genetics lab. Dr. Spencer is studying the DNA of a flu virus. She'll use the information to design this year's flu vaccine. Hi, Dr. Lee. What are you working on? I study human conditions caused by genetic mutation. This is a pedigree. It is a chart of family members that shows who carries mutant genes. Squares stand for males and circles for females. Half shading means the person carries one mutant copy of a gene. Whole shading means two. In a recessive condition, it takes two mutant alleles to see the problem. Geneticists and doctors work together towards cures for genetic conditions. Mutations. When people discover that they carry mutant genes, they often meet with a genetic counselor. A genetic counselor discusses their chances of having a child with a genetic condition. Believe it or not, this fishing boat is a genetics lab too. What do these fish have to do with genetics, Dr. Eisenberg? We're trying to protect wild salmon. By taking a DNA sample from each fish, we can figure out when they were born. Salmon breed in all these rivers. Young salmon migrate to the sea and then return to their home rivers. Are salmon an endangered species? Not really. In some rivers, salmon are doing okay, but in polluted rivers, the fish are in big trouble. The fish from each river carry a different kind of genetic name tag that scientists can read. Knowing where these fish come from helps us protect fish in polluted rivers. Meanwhile, we can still allow salmon fishing in healthier rivers. Since the discovery of DNA, genetics has become an important aspect in the study of life. Genetic discoveries have influenced conservation, medicine, and farming. This new knowledge raises ethical questions too. Should we use DNA from living creatures to make exact copies or clones? And what happens when we put new genes into these corn plants? They may produce more food, but would it be safe to eat? Finding the answers to these questions might be difficult, but it is amazing to realize that we are all connected through DNA and the power of heredity. Our genes make us different from each other, and the same too. Who knows what secrets remain locked in our DNA? That's the end of the book. Go ahead and go back and pause the video at any time. Remember that we are reading closely for new vocabulary. You should be looking to define the vocabulary as well as think through what patterns might be within the vocabulary. How do the words fit together? And which ones fit together and what might be opposites? You should be able to find many different kinds of patterns. You notice that the DNA and genetics vocabulary often has repeats depending on the words you're using. So please look for patterns. It will help you understand this vocabulary better. Thank you.